Hello, welcome to Political Thinking, a conversation with rather than an interrogation of someone whose political thinking helps to shape ours. Once again, London and Brussels are at loggerheads. Once again, the row between the UK and the EU is about the status of Northern Ireland. Once again, politics there in Belfast is deadlocked, with unionists refusing to share power with Sinn Féin. My guest this week is someone whose life and career is based on a refusal to take sides in that political battle. It's a decision that has paid dividends for Naomi Long, who leads the Alliance Party, which won a record number of seats in the recent Northern Irish Assembly elections. Brought up in one of the most fiercely loyalist parts of East Belfast, she insisted that politics should not be defined by whether you want Northern Ireland to stay in the UK or instead to be united with the rest of Ireland. But does her party really represent anything more than simply none of the above? Naomi Long from Belfast, welcome to Political Thinking.
Hi there.
Do you, as I even read out that introduction, ever find yourself ever so slightly weary of the stop-go nature of politics in Northern Ireland, which to many people looking in from outside seems defined by one side saying they won't talk to the other?
Absolutely. I suppose it has two impacts. I mean, yes, I get weary. When I was first elected to the Assembly back in 2003, the Assembly was suspended. And actually in the time that I've been elected to the Assembly, which has the breaks in between when I was elected to other places, but the Assembly has actually been suspended as much as it has sat. So to say that I'm weary of the stop-go nature of politics is probably putting it quite mildly. But also I'm motivated by it because the whole purpose of me getting involved in politics was that I wanted Northern Ireland to be better. I wanted to heal divisions, bring people together, try to make Northern Ireland work as a society and work from there in terms of people's longer term aspirations. And I suppose that's the evidence that we still have work to do. So yes, it's wearying, but it's also motivating.
Look, for 100 years, politics in the north of Ireland has been defined by which side you're on. Are you a unionist? Are you a nationalist? Do you ever look in the mirror and think, what are you doing thinking that you can end that and somehow convince people that politics is about what it's about all over the rest of the country?
Well, sometimes it does feel like an uphill struggle, I have to say, but it's mainly when I'm trying to explain it to journalists who maybe don't really understand the dynamics and the changes that have happened in society over the last 24 years of the Good Friday Agreement, or when I'm arguing with trolls on Twitter, which unfortunately I still do despite all the advice to the contrary, who want to put me into a box and pigeonhole my politics. And at that time I do feel like it's an uphill struggle. But actually, when I start to talk to the public, when I'm out in my constituency, when I'm out meeting people on the doors, when I'm doing my day job, which is Minister of Justice, it makes sense. So no, it doesn't feel strange or weird at all. And
it's true, isn't it, that more and more people are now telling opinion pollsters that they don't want to be boxed. They don't want to describe themselves as either unionist or nationalist.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people will have constitutional aspirations, but it doesn't necessarily define all of their politics. And the problem is that when you sign up to be a unionist or a nationalist, there's often a lot of other baggage that comes with that in terms of your wider political perspectives. And I think that even where people have some aspirations, they don't necessarily want to buy into the whole package. And it's not necessarily either the driving force. I mean, for me, you know, it isn't what motivates me to get up out of bed in the morning and go to work and be involved in politics and do all of that. I wouldn't be doing that if it was just about a united Ireland or remaining in the UK, because that's not, for me, fundamental. I do it because I love Northern Ireland. I believe it can be a better place. I believe our society, you know, can work together and that we can be more optimistic for the future.
That's what you say motivates you. And I want to get a sense, as we talk, really, of where that comes from. Now, you now represent East Belfast. You've done it in the Northern Ireland Assembly, you've done it in the House of Commons, you've done it in the European Parliament as well. And you've talked of East Belfast as being the place that formed me and my values. Now, to those of us who are occasional visitors to the city, we will know that the area you grew up in is one of the most tribal areas in the whole of Northern Ireland. You still see murals paying tribute to the loyalist terrorists on certain houses as you walk down the street. What sort of upbringing was it for you? How tribal was it, if you like?
Well, I think that's one side of East Belfast. The other side is that I grew up in a very close-knit community, a place where people genuinely had a real sense of community, where families grew up generation after generation together, and there was a sense of pulling together at what was a really difficult time. And it's that has kind of formed my views, rather than the kind of tribal stuff, which actually often impacted really negatively in those communities, where you had gatekeepers from paramilitary organisations exercising coercive control over communities rather than giving people that freedom. And that has kind of shaped my politics, because I hate bullying. I just can't stand it. And it felt like bullying, and it felt oppressive. So, I mean, for me, my politics is about trying to give people in those working class communities the freedom that people now in more affluent communities actually enjoy, to live in mixed areas, to be able to socialise together in mixed communities, to be able to send their kids to integrated schools, and all of those things that are starting to happen after the agreement. That's the aspiration that I have.
Fascinating words that you choose, Naomi. Fascinating words. You talk of coercive control, you talk of bullying. Is that your memories of being a little girl, feeling that you had to conform, that you were expected to be something, to behave in a particular way, to say certain things?
It wasn't so much as a child, because I think, like all parents, my parents protected me from much of what was going on. But were we aware that there were paramilitaries in the community? Yes, we were. Were we aware there were certain families that if you crossed them it would have consequences? Yes, we were. And people still live with that today.
Just spell out consequences, because there are younger people who listen and watch this for whom it's all, frankly, a mystery. It's lost in the mists of time. You are talking of living in an area where you risked life and limb if you were to do the opposite of what someone in your community thought was the right thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, in some cases, if there was a dispute with a family who were paramilitary linked, you know, people's windows would be smashed, their car set on fire, whatever it might be, as a kind of warning. Ultimately, people had to leave the community because they were threatened. So those things happened and still do happen. And I wasn't immune to that. And there was a wider sense that, because there was a battle going on in Northern Ireland at that time, and it did feel a kind of embattled position, that people needed to stick together, because there was this sense that if you didn't, that division would be exploited and so on. I suppose that you just grew up with that as a kind of an awareness. It wasn't, I mean, we had as a family, I suppose, an experience where, you know, it sounds like a trivial thing, but people were collecting to paint the curbs in our street red, white and blue for the 12th, and my mum wouldn't pay for that because she didn't believe we should deface public property. It's fairly basic stuff, but she felt strongly about it. And we woke up the next morning with a massive Union flag painted on the road outside our house with "Remember 1690" across the top. So, you know, we were getting the message that if you didn't conform, you would conform anyway. In saying that, they didn't paint the curbs outside the house. So, I mean, it was a it was a Pyrrhic victory, but we managed to at least assert that we didn't want that to happen. But that's the kind of stuff that would have happened, and it's something that I was conscious of growing up.
You live with these celebrations of events hundreds of years ago, with the belief that you had to assert your identity by painting flags, by having marches. Now, your dad was a member of the Order, as it would be known in East Belfast, the Orange Order,
yep,
which for him and people like him, I imagine, just seemed a perfectly natural thing to do, like being a member of the local club. But you became aware, I imagine, later in life, to many people in nationalist communities, seemed to be an aggressive organisation, an organisation
yep,
that was very hostile to them.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose there are still many people in Northern Ireland, particularly I think in rural communities, where kind of older men will go to the lodge because their fathers, their brothers, their neighbours were all involved, and it's kind of their community and it's how they engage with each other. So my dad was in the lodge. He was actually in both the Orange and the Black Preceptory, so he was quite involved. In fact, the 12th, you know, his lodge left from our house to go to the 12th when he was master of his lodge. So I was kind of steeped in that sort of culture, and it was really only when I went to university at Queen's in Belfast that I had my first taste of cross-community education, of integration, of meeting people from a completely different background who had different values, different ideals than I had. And
But you got a glimpse, I'm told, at school, didn't you, from a teacher who gave you a glimpse that you didn't have to go along with what everybody thought.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose my family were never particularly staunch, which sounds odd when my dad was in the Orange Order, but they were not particularly staunch. My mum wasn't particularly political at all. But at the time, kids would, scribble on the blackboard when the teacher wasn't there and that kind of stuff. And given what was being scribbled on the walls at the time by adults, some of those would be UVF or UDA slogans or whatever.
The loyalist paramilitaries.
Yeah, so that would have been scribbled with the teacher. And I remember our teacher when we were in primary school, and she came in and she was cleaning this off the board, and she said, "These are bad people. You should not be writing this on the wall," which is quite a brave thing to say, given that some of the kids in the class, their parents might have been involved in those organisations. But she said, "These are bad people. You should not get involved with this. It will ruin your life." And we were only about 8 or 9 at the time, and the conversation very quickly progressed, with people saying, "Miss, who do you vote for? Who do you vote for?" And she said, "The Alliance Party." And I didn't really know who the Alliance Party were, but I thought this was fascinating. So I'd gone home and told the story to my mum and dad. And my father jokingly said, "Oh, you should tell Miss Adair that she needs to be careful, because if you stand in the middle of the road, you'll get knocked down." A phrase I have to say I've heard many times since. And
he was wrong, was he?
Well, he certainly was, but I went back to school and told my teacher this, and she said to me, "Tell your father, much better to be in the middle of the road than in the gutter, dear." And I thought this was fascinating, that this debate was happening, and I told my dad, and he just laughed and said, "Good for her." But
it's a brave thing to do, though, Naomi Long. It's a brave thing to go against the politics of your father, to go against the politics of your own community, to stand up to the threats, which there undoubtedly were, of violence. Now, your family, unlike many in Northern Ireland, had, I think, no direct consequences from the Troubles, nobody who was killed. No. But you do remember, as a young girl, the experience of watching other people go through those sorts of tragedies.
I remember as a young girl, I was very involved with Girl Guides, and I was in the gang show in the Opera House. There was a big group of us all performing, and we had a really good run that week. And the Saturday night performance was a special performance because we were going to be joined by Lady Cecily Gibson, who was the chief guide in Northern Ireland. Her husband, Lord Justice Gibson, was a senior judge. And they were travelling back from Dublin, and there was an explosion, and they were killed. And they were murdered in that explosion. And I remember us being brought together on the stage before the Saturday night performance and told what had happened, because she'd come and she'd visited us during rehearsals, and she'd shown great interest, and we were excited for her to come and see the final show. And we were told what had happened. And then we went on with the show.
Naomi Long, many people would conclude in your community, in your family, I suspect, we need to fight the IRA, we need to fight Sinn Féin, the party that supports them as well. We need to, in other words, to back the traditional unionist parties. Now, you chose a different path. You say that your school teacher recommended it. You say that you and your husband met at Queen's University, and you had your first exposure, really, to people of a different background and different politics. What, though, convinced you that you could defy the convention, that you had to choose a side?
Well, I think there were a couple of things. I think, first of all, choosing a side had never really served my community well. So, yes, I came from a unionist background, and in many ways people would say, well, surely unionists were in a much more positive position. But I grew up in a terraced house, 2 up, 2 down, outside toilet, very little progress in our community. The whole thing was from politicians that they could rely on getting your support, but they didn't really have to do much in return. And I suppose my first experience was when I was at university. I approached my then MP, Peter Robinson, and I asked for his help with an issue, a financial issue, and I didn't get any response. And I just thought, what is the point of politics if people aren't there to help when you need it?
You were helped, weren't you? Because we've spoken to him by John Allardyce, an Alliance councillor who went on to be leader of the party.
Yeah.
Was that meeting, was that assistance he gave you crucial to your decision?
It was certainly crucial in terms of, first of all, it challenged my idea that politics was a pointless exercise, because that had been my perception, I guess, growing up in Northern Ireland, was that it was just about people bickering on television. And I apologise to people who now see me doing that. But, you know, I didn't see how it delivered for people. And when John Allardyce actually resolved the problem and did it quickly, I suddenly thought, actually, you can do politics in a way that will make a difference to people, that will actually make their lives a bit easier. And I like that, because I'm a problem solver by nature. That's how I approach life.
How good did it feel when years later, in 2010, you defeated that man who refused to help you or ignored your plea, Peter Robinson? You defeated him when you ran against him to take the House of Commons seat and shocked people, because he was, after all, First Minister of Northern Ireland at the time.
Yeah, he was. He had held the seat for 31 years. He narrowly won it at the expense of one of the party's founder leaders, Sir Oliver Napier. And so there was a particular resonance for the party in winning that seat. For me, I suppose we had a difficult relationship right from the outset with the DUP in East Belfast. I mean, I've never personalised it. It was never about bringing down Peter Robinson. It was about winning for Alliance.
Yeah, but they wanted to bring you down, because the 5 unionist parties all clubbed together 5 years later to get you out, which they successfully did.
They did.
Do they tell you, and you've talked about being late night on Twitter when you shouldn't be, I suspect they think you're a traitor, don't they? They think you've betrayed your roots, that you are actually helping Sinn Féin to success because you're not helping them.
Yeah, I mean, in Northern Ireland, this desire that we all have to take a side is pretty strong. And the local terminology is a Lundy, which kind of harks back to the Siege of Derry. So we're going a long way back. And I get that thrown at me occasionally. But I mean, what I do for my community, because I believe that the opportunities Northern Ireland can have as a peaceful place, as a place where we have more integrated lives, where we can work together instead of pulling apart, are so much greater than the opportunities we have with division. And it isn't to dismiss the past. The past matters, and we have to deal with that in a way that has integrity. And I don't excuse what the IRA did, and I certainly don't accept that it was valid. But I do believe very strongly that we have an opportunity as a result of the Good Friday Agreement to move beyond that conflict and start to look at how do we re-gear our society in a way that we can respectfully disagree on the constitutional position, but still work together on the health service, on the state of our communities, on housing, on the cost of living crisis, all those things that actually really impact on so many people.
This isn't the place, it's not a news interview for a detailed conversation about something that frankly makes a lot of people either yawn with boredom or scratch their head with bafflement, the Northern Ireland Protocol. Important though, of course, it is. But let me just put something of the principle to you. What ministers in Westminster say is, look, we have to listen to the unionist objection to this thing that makes them feel less British. We have to listen to the fact that businesses in Northern Ireland, some of them, find it a lot harder to do business with the rest of the UK than they did before, because that's what we need to do to support the Good Friday Agreement, to make sure there's peace. We can't just back one side and not the other. You think they're wrong. Why?
Well, first of all, I think they're being disingenuous, because this all stems back to Brexit, and no one listened to the majority of people in Northern Ireland over Brexit, not even to the degree where they would temper how hard a Brexit we would end up with. So the people of Scotland and Northern Ireland said no to Brexit. The people of Northern Ireland, the vast majority, the overwhelming numbers in Northern Ireland said that we shouldn't have Brexit. And it was clear that what we needed to do, if you look at our politics, for example, was that we needed some kind of soft landing zone. And we were denied that by the DUP and the Conservatives.
Given that you like to stress the positive, can you see a way out
Of course, there's a way out. I mean, first of all, in terms of how we deal with this, there's always a way out, but it's the same way out that there is for Northern Ireland and its difficulties. It's about respect and negotiation and trust.
But trust also has to be between the unionist community who oppose the protocol, or those that do,
Well,
and the British government. So they can't do a deal with Brussels if they haven't yet done a deal with the unionists, can they?
well, actually, they can, because international relations is not a devolved issue. And the Good Friday Agreement and the requirement for cross-community consent only applies to those issues which are devolved matters, not to those which aren't. So, for example, Brexit was able to happen even though a majority in Northern Ireland and a majority of nationalists opposed it. Let's look at, for example, a different issue the government are dealing with, the issue of legacy cases in Westminster. And they're bringing forward
legacies
proposals.
from the so-called Troubles. In other words, the legacy of the violence.
Legacy of the past. So actually looking at inquiries that have never been completed and trying to bring those to a conclusion. They're about to take action there, which will have an implication for the devolved government. They have no support from any political party.
When Michelle O'Neill was on this programme, the leader of Sinn Féin in the north, she said she thought there would be a united Ireland, quite possibly in her lifetime. Do you?
I don't know. It's impossible to say. Before Brexit, I would have said odds on probably not. Since things have been much more fluid, and people who would have been previously kind of unionist, though I would have said pragmatic unionists, perhaps is the way to describe them, who were content with the status quo, are less content with the status quo than they previously were.
Is that the best way to describe you, a sort of pragmatic unionist, content for now but ready to change your mind?
Not really. I don't really have, I suppose I don't really define myself in that way. For me,
No, you don't define yourself, but you must have a view.
no, well, not necessarily, because I don't really need to have a view right now, because it's not a pressing question. And as I've said before, I'm a practical, pragmatic politician. And
But if
I deal
everybody
with the
else is
issues
going
in front
around
of
having an
me.
argument about something this fundamental, are you seriously saying that you don't, when you're home with Michael, when you're pouring a glass of wine, say, I think, this or that, you have no opinion on it at all?
No, I don't have an opinion, a strong opinion as to which is the best outcome for Northern Ireland. I really genuinely don't. But I do see, as everyone else does, that every time the government intervenes in ways that are damaging to Northern Ireland or upsetting to the political process here, that it makes the argument for Northern Ireland remaining in the UK more difficult.
So if
I
you woke up
recognise
in
that
the
every
United
time.
Ireland, you would not be in despair?
Well, I recognise that every time unionism reacts in this kind of over-the-top way, it discombobulates nationalists in Northern Ireland who suddenly feel like, what's the point of giving this a go when we could have unity instead? And I just think that unionism in some ways has dealt itself a real kind of self-harming blow with Brexit and with their reaction to the protocol that I think is unhelpful.
Just want to return to something personal before we wind up, Naomi Long.
Sure.
You referred to, at the beginning of those late nights on Twitter, you referred to the fact that it's like a fight in a bar. I imagine that you have a lifetime of being abused.
Yeah, I mean, I get a lot of abuse, social media particularly, but not exclusively. I mean, just, I had an email recently. I was on RTE during the election count, and we just won a lot of seats. I was rushed up onto the podium to speak. It was a difficult election campaign for me. My father-in-law passed away from cancer after quite a long battle. He was buried on election day, so it was not an easy election for us. And I gave my interview and got home, opened my email, and some gentleman, I use the term lightly, had emailed me to tell me that my hair was a mess and that I hadn't seen a stylist in a long time and could do with working on my presentation if I was hoping people would vote for me. So I wrote back to him and told him that I wasn't just hoping people would vote for us. They had in significant numbers, more significant than ever before. And I said, look, over the last number of weeks, I have been doing a number of things. I have been running my department. I have been leading my party to unparalleled success in an election. I have buried my father-in-law, and I thought nothing mattered less to me than my hair. But thank you for reminding me that something does, your opinion of it. Because the idea that somebody would bother to send me an email about my hair was just, I was incredulous. But that's not that unusual. We're constantly getting advice about how we look, about our weight, about the tone of our voice. It's relentless, the abuse.
So finally, give me one tip. How do you, because there would be people listening to this thinking, how do you do it? How do you tolerate that level of abuse? And why would you still tell others, as I suspect you would as a party leader, to follow you into politics?
I have a strong support network and I have a good sense of humour. And I think a lot of the time you have to, at some stage, put yourself in the shoes of the people dishing out the abuse and imagine how sad and empty their lives must be, and remind yourself that your life is neither, and just move on.
Naomi Long, leader of the Alliance Party in Northern Ireland. Thank you very much for joining me on Political Thinking.
Thank you.
There is a sense that the plates are moving in Northern Irish politics, that perhaps in future politics will not simply be defined by which side of the constitutional divide you are on, but, and it is a mighty big but, if there really is going to be a referendum like the one we saw in Scotland on the future constitutional status of Northern Ireland, if people have to choose simply whether they're in favour of the Union, staying in the UK, or of Irish unity, it will be very hard for people in that story that Naomi Long was told by her father, people in the middle of the road, not to get run over. Thanks for watching.